Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the show, everyone, where today's episode brings us a voice who speaks directly to the heart of our mission: healing, growth, and transformation through education. Nathan Wray is an award-winning motivational speaker, a teen mental health first aid instructor, and a prevention coordinator who uses his personal journey from being expelled just before graduation to becoming a national voice in youth empowerment to connect with students, educators, and communities. He doesn't just talk about mental health and substance misuse. He's lived it, and now he's helping young people with raw stories across the country reclaim their self-worth and rewrite their stories. So Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. It's a privilege. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And welcome to the show here on March 24th.
It's good to be here. I'm really grateful and honored to talk with you and to speak with your audience today.
It's such a joy for all of us. So Nathan, I wanted to go ahead and first of all start with your story. If it's okay for us to share, you were actually expelled from school just before your graduation, and now you've received, all these years later, the Tennessee Governor's Award for Suicide Prevention. And tell us the steps that you took in terms of your transformational journey that has moved your pain into purpose. And what can struggling students learn about your journey and your story?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of back up to high school really quick. 3 weeks before high school, that whole senior year, pretty much all 4 years of high school, I didn't listen to anybody. I had my own agenda. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I didn't care about anybody else. And I thought my decisions only affected me. And by the time that I got to my senior year of high school, I was told pretty much halfway through the year that if I didn't pass a math class, that I wasn't going to graduate, that I wouldn't have enough credits. And so I didn't take that seriously. I didn't buckle down. I didn't have any discipline. I didn't ask for help. And 3 weeks before graduation, they came to me and they said, "Hey, listen, you're not putting in the effort. You're not putting in the work. It shows. So you need to leave." And that was the end of my high school career. And I went to graduation and I watched all of my friends walk across the stage and get their diplomas. And I heard their families clap and cheer for them. And I watched them take pictures afterwards. And here I am in this spot of isolation and loneliness, but also blaming everybody else. Certainly wasn't my fault. I did everything that I was supposed to do as a kid. And so I played the blame game for a really long time. After graduation, I had the opportunity to move to Phoenix, Arizona. And so I moved and spiraled a little bit further out of control. My parents gave me the opportunity to move to Nashville. My dad got transferred to Nashville, Tennessee. And so I moved to Nashville, Tennessee with my parents. I ended up getting a job there. I met my wife there. At that job, I was still using drugs and alcohol, still making really poor decisions. We ended up having a son. And when he was 3 months old, I came home from work one night. I had stopped at a bar. I had stopped at a friend's house and had used. And when I got home, she was waiting on the porch for me to get home. And it was like 2 in the morning. And I walked up to the porch. And even though I had been drinking, I had been high, I still remember this moment because I was sweating. My heart was pounding. My legs were shaking. I was certain that she was just going to end our marriage. And when I got to the porch, she said, "Nathan, you've got to make a decision. You can be a husband and a father, or you can leave." And in that moment, I realized like she's giving me an option. I have this option. I didn't make the right choice at first. I did leave at first. And several months later, we kind of patched things up. And I asked her if she could help me become sober. And so she did everything that she could. She dialed me in. She gave me rules. She gave me responsibilities. She gave me a schedule. Like I had never really had that before. I've got great parents, but I just was never really in a system of a process for the day. It wasn't like, hey, we eat breakfast at this time, lunch at this time, dinner at this time. It was just like, yeah, you eat when you eat, man. And so she really hammered that down for me. And so in 2023, I got sober and I haven't used a substance since 2023. We ended up having three more children, and life was difficult because all of our children have some type of special need. And so when you're raising four kids that have special needs, it's expensive, it's timely, it's costly, but it's a blessing as well. But we ended up moving around, taking different jobs. We ended up in Tennessee. I started working as a kind of a youth leader at church youth groups, and I had a friend that said I would be really good for a job for a nonprofit. And so I applied for the job. I got the job, and it was doing substance use prevention. And at the time, one of my daughters was 10 years old, and she was really struggling. She was struggling with school, she was struggling with behaviors, and she was struggling with being bullied in school. And one night we found a text message on her phone that was her talking about ending her life. And I will say, people are probably going like, 10 years old, you gave her a phone at 10 years old. Yeah, if I could go back and change that, 100% would go back and not give her a phone until she was 18, not even 16, but 18. But you learn from the lessons, the mistakes that you make, you learn from them. But I sat with her all night and I didn't know what to do. When I asked her, how often do you think about suicide? And she said, every moment, like every single moment, I think about it. And I just didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know where to go. But I knew that I wasn't going to go to sleep that night because I didn't know what she was going to do. And the next morning, we got everybody up, we got her ready for school. And right before school, she made an attempt. And we had to take her to the emergency room. She's alive and well today. She's thriving. She's 18 years old and doing amazing now. But in that moment, it was really, really scary. But it put me on a pathway to figure out, first, I need to help my daughter, right? Like, first, I need to do that. Once I figure that out, I want to help other families because they're going through this kind of thing too. Maybe they're not talking about it, but they certainly are. So we got her the help that she needed. We got her some really intense therapy. Had a friend that did ABA therapy, and that's for kids with autism. And that's one of her diagnoses is she does have autism. But we got her ABA therapy, and life turned around for her. She found some really great friends. She found purpose. She's an artist. And so when I knew that she was well, that's when I started to dive into how can I help other families prevent this from happening to them. And so I became question, persuade, refer certified. I became an instructor on it as well. And so I started teaching QPR classes so that churches, businesses, I don't care who you were, if you owned a car lot, I was going to see if you'd let me come do a QPR class for your sales team because they might have family who's struggling with this. And so I just started doing a lot of that. I don't know the reason why I won the award. I was nominated for it, but I think part of the reason was because me and my youngest daughter in 2019, we printed a ton of cards that just said you matter, and then it had the prevention lifeline number on the back before it was 988. We also had suckers. And so we'd give them a sucker and we'd say, hey, we're glad you're here. And if you ever need this card, please use it. And that kind of caught on. People were talking about it, and even people were like, well, I don't need it, but I'm going to pay it forward, and they would pass it on to somebody else. And so I think that's what won me the award or got me nominated for the award. But we were always focused on helping families to prevent suicide.
I'm nearly at loss of words because I'm just digesting your story. Thank you for all that you're sharing, inspiring our guest with. And I'm also thinking about in terms of, first of all, what does QPR stand for?
Question, persuade,
Oh,
refer.
got it. And something else that comes to mind is when individuals choose to turn towards substance use. Tell us a little bit about what they're thinking about at that time. Like, what validates the need to use?
Yeah. So I'll just tell you from my experience, I had adverse childhood experiences. And someone like me who has four or more is 38 times more likely to die by suicide. And someone like me who has four or more adverse childhood experiences is 400% more likely to suffer from depression. And someone like me who has six or more adverse childhood experiences is likely to lose about 20 years off the end of their lifespan. And so for me, I was trying to cope with those adverse childhood experiences. I was trying to cope with the shame and the guilt that I was feeling. I was trying to cope with the depression that I had. I was trying to cope with feeling alone, like nobody else could understand what I was going through, not being able to tell anybody. I was trying to cope with all of those things, but there just, for me, there was no way to cope. And so I was offered a cigarette for the first time at 12 years old. And when I used that cigarette, all that dopamine hit at once. And when that dopamine hit at once at 12 years old, I wasn't thinking about the shame. I wasn't thinking about the guilt. I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. I just thought, oh, that felt good. And I like that feeling. And I want to avoid the emotional pain that I've been feeling. And so I'll just keep using cigarettes. And that's how it started for me was I was using cigarettes to avoid the emotional pain. I never got that same cigarette buzz ever again. And so eventually I moved to marijuana and then I moved to alcohol and then I moved to other drugs. And I just kept chasing that feeling of numbness. And I think for me, that's what it is. I can't speak for everybody else, but for me, it was I needed to feel numb. And that was the only way that was happening for me.
So when you speak with school age students and you hear about their stories, some maybe on similar directions and paths, what advice do you give them to really humanize the decisions and allow them to adjust their thinking to help themselves?
Yeah. So, first of all, I let them know that no one's opinion of them is going to determine their value. And that's something that I always struggled with as a kid was that, man, if somebody has a negative opinion of me, that determines my value. And that's going to put my value in the tank. And then it's going to put my worth in the tank. And then I'm going to feel anxious and alone. And so that's one of the first things that I share with students is no one's opinion of you, no matter who they are. And I've had some feedback on this, and I'll say it doesn't matter if it's your principal, it doesn't matter if it's your parent, it doesn't matter if it's your guardian, it doesn't matter if it's the mayor of the town. Their opinion of you does not determine your value. And sometimes principals are like, "Well, my opinion does," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, take that with a grain of salt," because in a way, yes. But what I'm trying to share with them is that if somebody looks at you because you've made a mistake in your life and they think there's the troubled kid, that opinion doesn't matter. So that's one of the first things that I share with them. The other things that I share with them is proper preparation prevents poor performance. And so I talk about basically like the keys to success in life. And it's goal setting, it's determination, and it's self control. And if you want proper preparation prevents poor performance, then you've got to have some goal setting. You've got to have the determination to line up your values with those goals so that if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, do you want to hit this vape with me or do you want to hit this THC cart with me?" You can look at your goals and you can look at your values and go, "Yeah, no, I've got enough self control here. It's doing the fundamentals, it's doing the basics." You don't win games in scrimmage. You don't win games by being curious. You win games by practicing the fundamentals. And that's how you win at life. You practice the fundamentals of life: goal setting, discipline, self control. And so we have a lot of conversations around that. And then when I talk to students in a big auditorium or even in a classroom, all of that includes resilience, it includes coping skills, coping mechanisms. So it's not just, I'm going to come in here and preach at you and tell you don't do drugs. We tried that in the 80s, just say no, and it didn't work, right? And so we have to tell kids, say no, but here's how you do it. That's what I help kids discover. I help them discover how they say no. Because if I'm an artist and you're approaching me about drugs or alcohol, and I know it's going to affect the way that my brain thinks, it's going to affect my creativity, I'm not interested. I'm going to keep working on my art. And if I get angry, that art can be a coping skill. Or if I get angry and I play the guitar, that guitar can be a coping skill. Or if I feel ashamed, I can play the guitar and that guitar is a coping skill. I can go work out I love it when I talk to high school athletes and they're like, oh, we don't need this. We don't need someone to come in here and tell us not to do drugs. And I'm like, just give me a chance, give me an opportunity. Let me talk. And at the end, it's usually they're the ones that are coming up to me afterwards. And they're like, man, thank you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
And know as educators that, especially when I was teaching at the middle school level, it was so important for us not to focus on redemption or exoneration, but at least focus on giving students a second chance. I taught for 1 year, but it was a spring term followed by a fall term. So it was a calendar year, not a school year that I taught for. And in the fall, I had some of my colleagues come up to me and say, hey, watch out for students A, B, C, X, Y, and Z, because they're, as a first year teacher, they'll put it on you. And no student wants that. Just like how no teacher wants to be like, oh, you got that teacher and have that reputation. It's so important to always try and offer a second chance to all of those involved.
That's one of the things that I've worked on over the past 2 years. I didn't create this program myself, but I helped create a program for students who have been caught vaping at school. And instead of suspending them and sending them home so that they can just keep vaping at school, we created a program to where they take a class on Saturday. First, the school has to change their policy to be able to do this, but we've helped schools change their policies. They take a class on a Saturday. Their guardian comes to the class for the first hour with them. They're going to get that first hour education as well. After that first hour, the guardian leaves. The student stays. They get the continuous 3 hours of education. It's more like a workshop than it is like someone just talking down to you. And then after the 3 hours, we send the sign-in sheet to the coordinator of school health or to the principal, whoever's running the program. We let them know that those students attended and that they are welcome to come back to school on Monday morning. They don't miss school. They're not taken out of their school. They're not suspended. They will get a citation to like juvenile probation, but as long as they pass the class, that citation is thrown out. They never have to go see the judge as long as they pass the class. So that's one of the things that I really wanted to focus on because I remember being a kid and being told, you have to go home for 3 days. And I thought, this is awesome because I got in trouble for is what I'm going to do at home because nobody's home.
Sure, right.
So when we talked about this diversion program, we really wanted to make sure that we were keeping kids in their schools because what we also know is that kids that go to alternative school, if they get sent to an alternative school for 2 to 3 days or even 45 days, let's just say 45 days, they go to alternative school for 45 days and then they go, okay, you go back to your regular school now. So you go back to regular school on Monday. What you learned in alternative school, it was not the same lessons that you were learning in your typical school. Now you're behind. So now you're not only behind, now you're frustrated, now you're mad. And what do you do? What do you do when you're frustrated and you're mad? You use the only coping skills that you have. You go back to using substances, or you get into a fight, or you smart off to a teacher, and then you're right back at alternative
And it
school.
just becomes a cycle.
It's a cycle. And so one of the things that I've been helping schools do as well is to set up almost like a reentry program from alternative school. So if you do have a student in alternative school for a really long time, I want to help you set up a reentry program so that someone is going to touch base with that student the morning they return to their typical school, and they're going to keep touching base with them for at least 90 days. So that student knows that they're supported, that they're not alone, that they have some type of help. And if they need some like coping skill suggestions, they can turn to their reentry program advisor and go, hey, this is not going well. What do I do? If you are in a school, ask if you have a reentry program from alternative school. And if you don't, call me, send me an email, reach out to me. I will help you set that up.
And that info will definitely be in our show notes as well, because confession time here, I have not been in a middle or high school classroom as the instructor of record since 2019. So I know that the situation was pitiful and pathetic in 2019. So to see how that has grown since 2020 frightens me. And I am continuing to do my research through my contacts and my peers and my connections, but have yet to do it by being on the front lines myself. So I appreciate my colleagues who are doing that on the behalf of all hero teachers out there.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed even before COVID times is that my students would come to me and say, I feel like a number. I don't feel like I'm seen or visible at the school. Nobody wants to listen to me. My voice doesn't matter. So, Nathan, I wanted to hear a little bit more about what advice you would offer, especially to institutions that focus on those matrix-based solutions and how they can be reworked in a way to benefit the well-being of our students. And you also mentioned recently in an Instagram reel about issues with vaping, especially when parents are purchasing the vape for their kid and saying, well, it came from me. And you said something like, well, then would you start buying the crack for your kid too and becoming their drug dealer? Tell us about what schools and families and communities to do in order to get involved and adjust the matrix-based thinking of our system. That's a heavy question. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it takes me back to substance use prevention coalition work. And when you look at that type of work, you have 12 sectors of the community. It's government, it's law enforcement, it's hospitals, it's parents, it's religious organizations, it's small business. I'd have to get out the whole index, but there's 12 sectors of the community. Unless those 12 sectors are collaborating efficiently, sharing data, sharing information. And I'll give you an example of sharing information. I had a friend, former police officer, tell me this story once, but there was a child in DCS, and that child's parents were pulled over in another county, and they found drugs in the car seat of that child. And so that child was entered into the system as taken away from the family, put into DCS foster care. The family ended up getting the child back, did what they were supposed to do. But about 3 months earlier, there were issues at school with a sibling of the child. Major behavior issues, coming to school late, coming to school with just raggedy clothes on and not being kept up. And so there was a report made to their local DCS. So these two DCSs could have connected, they could have collaborated, but they didn't know about this situation. The younger child ended up passing away from abuse, and that could have been prevented if the collaboration would have been there. And I'm a huge fan of collaboration. I want to partner with everybody because if I can get DCS to talk to the school, and I can get the school to talk to the hospital, and I can get the hospital to talk to the police departments, share information about what's going on, then we can effectively help these children, especially the ones who are at really high risk of substance use in the future. That's those kids who have the adverse childhood experiences. So, one of the things that we did here locally, Tennessee got opioid abatement funds, and those funds came from the state of Tennessee sued Big Pharma, and Big Pharma had to pay out, I think it was Purdue, had to pay out money to the state of Tennessee. So the state of Tennessee, instead of just keeping it as the state of Tennessee, they distributed it to the local county governments. And they said, here's what each one of you get. And it's up to you to collaborate and figure something out to do with it. So what we did as a community is 12 sectors came together and we started to talk about what is the best way to use this money. And so what we did was we created 3 jobs in our community. We created a community navigator, someone who is going to be out on the front lines working with people in active substance use, people who are unhoused. They were going to be working with them and seeing if they could get them into treatment, see if they can get them into housing, get them food, whatever that was. The other job that we created was the emergency room navigator. So if you came in the emergency room under an overdose diagnosis, you were meeting with that navigator. And the ER navigator and the community navigator, they were sharing information. So if someone came in for an overdose, they would put it in the system and go, hey, this person came in for an overdose. And the community navigator would go, hey, yes, I just saw them today and I'm glad they came in. They were very interested in treatment. And so, okay, now we're moving forward. The third position we created was, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's a position in the school, and basically, they're like a navigator. And so those 3 people communicate. So now, if a person that's in the emergency room has kids, they've been out in the community, they've talked with the community navigator. Now we're letting the school know, hey, these kids, they probably have an adverse childhood experience. So, what services can we get them now? How can we intervene now? What positive childhood experiences can we create for them now so that they have the right prevention in place so that they don't follow the same generational cycle that their guardian is? That's what collaboration really, truly looks like. It's not about getting credit. It's if we can come together and really take the funding that we get from whatever grants we can acquire. If your community does have opioid abatement money, I would figure out where that's at. And I would want to sit down as a community and say, how do we use this the best way to help people, but ultimately to keep kids safe? They can change the cycles that are happening in their neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's so important for us to revise those broken systems. And I know in sociology, we call that organic solidarity. And all the systems come together. It's like in the human body, if the kidney's not working, or the stomach's not working, or the brain isn't working, if something is off, it affects the way that the entire rest of the body works together. That's why we call it organic solidarity. And I think when you have all the systems start to communicate to keep our students safe for now, that's a big mistake I made when I was the teacher. I didn't collaborate with the system. Well, I tried to, but they weren't collaborating with me. Oh,
Right.
I'll
Yeah.
put blame where blame
Yeah.
is due. They
Yeah.
would not collaborate back with me. So I thought my job was to keep my students safe, period. I did not have the training for that. I was not a therapist. So now I'll put
Yeah.
the blame back on myself. My job was to keep my students safe, comma, for now. The punctuation mattered.
Yeah.
And I didn't acknowledge that, which got me into a lot of trouble, seeing myself as that therapist with no training nor means. And I
Yeah.
think when these systems actually do start to communicate and collaborate, that just makes the bureaucracy so much more efficient.
It really does. It really does. And it's not only efficient, but purposeful.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times when we look at community where they've got, okay, the police department's coming together, fire department's coming together, the mayor's there, you got all these bureaucracies, you think, there's no purpose in this. These are just people trying to scratch each other's backs, and that's
Yeah.
it. But one of the other things that was implemented here in our community, it's implemented in several communities across the East Coast. I don't know how far it goes out west, but it's called Handle with Care. And so if there's an experience where a school age child, maybe their house catches on fire, or maybe their parents are up late arguing and the police have to come, Handle with Care is an officer will arrive at the house and they find out what school those children go to, and they send a Handle with Care notice to the school. And it just says,
Wow.
Johnny Smith, handle with care. That lets the school know that, hey, there is a situation. We're not going to tell you what it is because this is not about spreading gossip. This is just about making sure that these kids can get services if they need them. So if the kid comes to school and there's behavior issues right away, we go, oh, wait a second. We're not going to give them detention. We're going to handle them with care. Let's take them into the counselor's office. Let's let them calm down for a little bit. Maybe they're grumpy. Maybe they have behavior issues because they need a nap. So let's give them some space to take a nap and then let them re-engage back into school later in the day. If that's what we have to do as a community to make sure that kids are safe, then that's what we need to do. The Handle with Care program, you can find it through the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And I'm sure it's in other local districts as well. But if anyone is interested in that, I can connect them with the director of that program.
I'm adding that to our show notes as well, so those will be available. Yeah,
Awesome.
and Barbara Sorrell's Reaching and Teaching Children Exposed to Trauma, she mentions the exact same thing, where it's a really significant game changer for really all parties when you see a student who has suffered from an experience or an event or an instance, and that behavior starts to show in class. You change that conversation from "what's wrong with you" to "how can I support you?" And when you, as the program itself says, when you handle with care, it really helps the student heal and focus on decisions that may not continue to destroy them as a person as well, or lead to destructive outcomes.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that I mentioned in my talk when I talk with students is how everybody kept asking me the same question. What's wrong with you, Nathan?
Mhm.
And nobody ever asked me, not that I can remember. I'm sure maybe somebody probably did, but that I can remember. Nobody ever really asked me, "Hey, what happened?
And how can I help you?
And how can I help you?"
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yep.
And that's definitely one of the things that our own teachers listening should know as well. So, Nathan, I wanted to know for our listeners here that are in charge of the classroom spaces, what guidance do you have for them to help focus on a more trauma-informed thought process while also not burning out? Because I'll also mention this, what got me into trouble and why I left the classroom in the middle of the year was because I did take that trauma-informed approach where I did ask, how can I help you? And I wasn't ready to hear that my
Yeah.
students were suicidal. They were isolated. They were feeling
Yeah.
this, they were feeling that, nor was I equipped to help them. But to the chagrin of my administration, I tried.
Yeah.
And that's what led to both my burnout and my reason to leave because I was no longer viewed as just the eighth grade English teacher. I was like stepping on the toes of the school psychologist, and it was a very bad situation. So, what
Well,
advice do you have for teachers to stay in their role but still try and help?
yeah, I believe in micro moments, and micro moments are just those little things that you do every day to let a student know that you see them, you hear them, and you value them. It doesn't mean that you give them the authority to behave any way they want to behave, but it shows them that you're there and that you do care. And I will tell you, as a kid, I didn't believe anybody cared. I didn't, except for one teacher. And this one teacher, she was my sophomore English teacher. I guess you would call it ELA today. And in my freshman year, a lot of teachers wrote me off. I failed every class. I had got caught making fake report cards in school and had been in trouble for that. And a lot of teachers just said, this kid's just trouble. You don't want him in your class. And instead of looking at those notes, she called my parents and she said, "Can you tell me what Nathan is interested in? I really want to like mold my class, not just after what he likes, but after what most of the kids like in my class." And I was a big Chicago Cubs and a big Chicago Bulls fan, Michael Jordan fan. And the first day of class, when I walked in, there were Chicago Cubs posters on the wall. And I thought, this is cool. Like, I'm automatically interested now. And so we took that first semester to read about the life history of Willie Mays. And then we had to write reports on it, but I was engaged and I was having fun with it. And it was the best grade I ever got in high school. I never got a better grade than that, but it was those micro moments of just hanging a poster up. It was the micro moments of when I was walking down the hall and acting a fool. She'd fist bump me and she'd go, "Nathan." And I go, I know. And immediately I would cut it out because I would think about that classroom and how I wanted to be in it, not how I wanted to be suspended and just go home, but I wanted to go to that class and I want to make sure that I can still go to that class. So I'm going to stop acting like a fool in these hallways. So that's one of the things that I do quite often is when I go to speak at a school, I actually ask if I can just stay the whole day. I don't want to be there for just an hour and do my speech and then leave. I want to make a lasting impact. And I take that opportunity that whole day for the micro moments. I'm going to fist bump kids in the hallway. I'm going to ask them what's on their shirt. I'm going to tell them that I like their glasses. I'm going to tell them that I like their shoes. I'm going to ask them questions about their favorite class in school. I'm going to sit with them at lunch. And honestly, during lunchtime, I look for the kid sitting alone and I'm going to go sit with that kid. I know as teachers, you are busy and you probably have to grab your lunch and do your planning, but I guarantee you there's a kid in your cafeteria sitting alone that needs to be seen, valued, and heard. And you have an opportunity to take your lunch and sit down with them and just ask them what they're interested in. Ask them what they love to do. Ask them what their favorite thing about life is. And you will see a kid that goes from sitting alone at a table to a kid that has friends within just a couple of weeks because you gave them the space to be valued, seen, and heard. It's the micro moments. I've been doing those micro moments for 3 to 4 years, and I'll help my local schools if they have a student who has some behavior issues. I'll just go and stand in the hallway before school starts And I'll wait for that student to walk by and I'll be like, oh man, you got a lot of riz, don't you? And I'll fist bump them. I won't ask their name. I won't do nothing. We'll just do that at first. And then eventually I'm going to get their name. Eventually we're going to have conversations. And eventually there's an opportunity to mentor that student. And I will tell you that there just aren't enough mentors for students. If you have the ability, if you have the background, if you have a clean, safe background, become a mentor for a student because every single student needs a mentor and there just aren't enough. But it's the micro moments. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to worry about being trauma informed. You just have to see the humanity in people. And that's it. And if a kid feels that teacher saw me today, they're not only going to have better behavior, they're going to have better outcomes in the classroom. And that's what we need. We need the better behavior. We need the better outcomes in the classroom, not for our benefit, not so that the standards are this and the standards are that, but because now we're creating a culture of, hey, I'm valued and there's value in this culture. I have worth and there's worth in this culture. And I'm seen and I can see other people. And now I can, as a student, now I can be the fist bumper. Now I can be the hey, I like your shirt. And when those things start to cycle in a school, you automatically reduce substance use and violence. When kindness is the culture of the school, you automatically reduce substance use and violence because it's not at the front of their mind. It's how can I be kind today? And that's what our schools need. We need to change the culture to kindness, and that will change everything for you.
And having that with itness as well. And I appreciate all of our educators who take that time. And your story with your 10th grade English teacher gives me all the feels. And a big shout out
Oh,
to all educators everywhere who make those
yes.
changes in students every day. And I'm also thinking about when you were on the front lines of youth empowerment, speaking about mental health, substance misuse, and resilience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that schools and communities have on these topics? And as we approach our closeout, how can teachers and schools better show up for students to help them within these areas?
Eliminate the stigma. That's my answer. It's always going to be my answer. Having someone come in to talk about mental health, teen mental health, teaching teenagers how to provide teen mental health first aid to their classmates, that doesn't mean that you have a mental health issue in your school. Doesn't mean that every student is suffering with mental health. It just means that, I'll go back to the 5 P's in life. It's just proper preparation prevents poor performance. So if I do have a student who's struggling someday and they're not coping well, but I've taught every single student teen mental health first aid, that student's going to be okay. But there's this stigma of we don't need that. We don't have a mental health issue in our school. We don't want anybody to know we have a mental health issue in our school.
If you're
If we,
trying to hide it, it's probably there.
yeah, yes. And if there's smoke, there's fire.
Yes.
It's just, listen, we're trying to keep kids alive. The rate of teen suicide has skyrocketed, and we're trying to keep kids alive. And I think you would rather have your kid go through teen mental health first aid than for you to go through a funeral service. I believe that. So it's reducing the stigma and openly talking about mental health. And it's okay to say, hey, one time I went to a counselor. You don't have to share why or when or where. Hey, I went to a counselor once and it helped. It's okay to do that, but we've got to reduce the stigma in our schools. And kids, they want to talk about mental health. They do. It's we can show you the data. Like
Yeah,
you
because
can
they're feeling it and they don't know why or how to talk to someone about it.
yeah, and they don't know who to turn to. They don't really
Exactly.
know who the right trusted adult is. Is it my guardian? Is it my school counselor? Is it my coach? It's but they want to talk about it. I mean, you can just Google the statistics on this, and kids overwhelmingly want to talk about mental health. And if we start having those discussions instead of sweeping it under the rug, then things will start to change. But if we don't, what's this? We're going to get the same results. Nothing changes if nothing changes.
And is there anything in our conversation today that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to share with our listeners or a key takeaway for them as well?
Man, just, sometimes I get to do assemblies. I get to sit in the big auditoriums. And then some days I'm in a classroom for the whole day. And it's taught me something. It's taught me that educators are underappreciated, they're underpaid, and they're undervalued. And I just want to express my sentiment that if you are an educator, you are doing selfless work, and the effort that you put in each and every single day, it's not going unnoticed. People do see it, and people do appreciate it. And from the bottom of my heart, if you are an educator and you have a student who has behavior issues, who might have some substance use issues, I will tell you, be like a 10th grade English teacher and figure out what they love and pinpoint that and talk to them about that. It doesn't matter if you teach math and they want to talk about science. If you teach art and they want to talk about mechanics, pinpoint what they love and just be that person for them, because they need it so desperately. But you all are doing an amazing job, and I'm so thankful for you all.
We're equally gratified that you're a part of our system as well, Nathan. So thank you so much. So Nathan, thank you so much for your honesty, your heart, and your advocacy in today's conversation. And your message reminds us that our greatest setbacks can really shape our greatest impacts as well, and that educators have the power to either break cycles or build bridges. And if you're listening and want to bring Nathan's message to your school or community, visit NathanRaySpeaks.com as seen in our show notes, or follow him on Instagram and TikTok at NathanRaySpeaks for more. We'll see you next time on the Classroom Narratives podcast, where healing and education continue to go hand in hand.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.